I'm going to read an excerpt from a story I wrote a few months ago called Pretty Boy. It takes place in the 70s in a small town called Pretty Boy, Maryland, which is about 40 minutes outside of Baltimore. The narrators are some men who live in the town, and they're telling the story of the Pretty Boy killer who's been murdering teenage girls. Agnes Jones is a 14-year-old who has managed to escape the killer, and Kyle Watts is a young police officer who is interviewing her later in the scene, and that's what you need to know. It's hard to say what we thought of the Joneses before all this. We probably did not think very much. They lived up on Spooks Hill Road in a cabin that was hundreds of years old. The father was a carpenter and refurbished the thing himself. Those first years, they didn't have plumbing. Apparently, when the mother was pregnant with Agnes, she had to go to the outhouse in the middle of winter, in the middle of night, at least till she gave in to the convenience of the chamber pot. What century are we living in? That's what we thought when we ran into them, which we tried not to do too often. The Joneses, they didn't eat meat, they didn't hunt themselves. They'd had a garden like a full-on farm, and a lot of the kids' clothes were handmade. They seemed like hippies, but not so colorful. They seemed like settlers. The whole rest of the world was already settled. Our kids liked their kids. They had, as Jeff Mann put it, daguerreotype eyes. We think all he means by this is they had their father's light eyes. When we talk about them in public, we called them the Spooks. Danny, the oldest, was best friends with Kyle Watts growing up, though by the time of the killer, Danny was living in Baltimore. Then there was Anthony and Mark, we think in that order. It was hard to tell them apart. They both had long hair like girls. Of course, then Agnes, who was quiet, and that's all we really knew of her. But Jeff, the writer, had a time describing her. Said she had the silent presence of an owl, said she walked on her toes like all her brothers, that her hair was straight, long, and plain coffee colored, parted in the middle, and always pulled into a low snagged ponytail. After the attack, Agnes stopped speaking. She didn't speak at the hospital. She didn't speak when she got home. She didn't speak to her mother, father, or brothers, much less the doctors and police. We were angry with her for this. The whole town was. The killer had gotten away. The police found a bloody stretch of bank at the reservoir and nothing else. The only thing we had was Agnes, and her parents just let her lie in bed for a week and ignore all questions. Kyle Watts said they tried all sorts of things. They had a child psychologist ask her to draw pictures. She just held an uncapped blue marker and stared at the paper with a milky catatonic gaze. They made her go into the station. They set a box of 12 sprinkled donuts on the table in front of her. They said please, they made threats. They showed her pictures of suspects and asked her to point. They reminded her of dead May and dead Molly and dead Jamie. Finally, Kyle asked the detective to let him sit with her. When he went into the interrogation room, she was sitting part sideways in the chair so she could lean her shoulder and head against the back. She wore a navy t-shirt with a pocket. Kyle had seen Danny and Anthony and Mark each wear it over the years before they got big. Kyle said he thought it would probably fit Agnes into old age. Agnes, he said, do you want any? He was eating black licorice even though he hated the taste. You know, I was always running around with Danny, he said. When your mom was pregnant with you, she ate this stuff constantly. She said she'd never liked it before, that it must have been you who liked it. She'd always make me and Danny walk out to the gas station and buy her some. She'd give us a little extra money so we could get sodas. He took a tissue out of his pocket and spit his mouth full of licorice into it. I've been trying to understand, he said. We all have. Agnes leaned forward and took the bag of licorice, held it up close to her face, and inhaled. Kyle said the lighting in the room was severely fluorescent, that Agnes's pupils, though she squinted, were pinholes. He took his sunglasses out of his front pocket and handed them to her. The lenses were mirrored, and when she put them on, Kyle could only see a distorted dual image of himself. I was wondering, he said, when Anthony found you, he said you were walking. Were you walking? She said nothing. The air in the room was dry, and static caused her loose hairs to stand upright on her head. Why were you walking? She shifted in the chair, and there was a snap of electricity, a spark, and the hairs lay flat. I was tired, she said. He said it was like a whisper, not soft or quiet or secret, but voiceless. You weren't scared? I was just tired, she said in that whisper. Agnes, Kyle said. He could feel the motion behind the mirrored wall, the excitement of his colleagues. How did you get away? He said she looked at him dead on. In the glasses, his reflections were skewed, moon-faced heads too big for the bodies. She said with a little bit of voice, he wouldn't have survived killing me. Thank you.